For about 35 years, since I was 2.5 years old, I have been to many eye doctors in several different countries, spread over 3 different continents. And along the way, I have been confused a lot and also learned a lot as they try to diagnose and re-diagnose my condition. I'm sure that if you have a disability or a chronic illness, you know exactly what I'm talking about. So, in this video, I'm gonna share with you some of these things that I've learned so that you can be better prepared the next time you have an eye doctor visit, and also to hopefully help some of you avoid some of the confusion that I've been through. I'm also going to tell you how my diagnosis changed again very recently. Welcome to Legally Blind. First, a moment of truth. And here to help us face the truth is a beagle called Chicken. Hello, Chicken. It's important to understand that many of these eye conditions or other chronic illnesses are actually quite difficult to diagnose. You might be tempted to get mad at your doctors for not giving you the correct information right away. But none of the doctors I've actually met along my 35-year-long journey were bad doctors or jerks or impatient or any of these things. Simply, the condition I had was difficult to diagnose. Many of these retinal conditions have very similar symptoms and progress in similar ways, and also at the same time there's a lot of variety between individuals on how they progress and how they present with the symptoms. So a lot of the time it really doesn't have anything to do with the doctor's competence. It's just an actually challenging, difficult problem for them to solve. Luckily, there have been quite a few improvements in the equipment available for doctors to diagnose these conditions and actually to really look into your eye and really see what's going on. That has allowed for more precision and accuracy when diagnosing these conditions, but it is still difficult. So, yeah, maybe don't get mad at your doctors right away. Sometimes you might be right to get mad, but make sure that you are correct to be mad. And now on to practical tips for your doctor's visit. First things first, obviously, if it's not your first visit and you know what you have or have a little bit of information on what you have, then do as much research as you can on this information that you got. I know that this is a double-edged sword with conditions that have confusing symptoms. When you go online and you try to read about them, you find that there are several conditions in which the symptoms you have can be present, especially if your doctor has been honest with you and they told you that it's hard to tell exactly what you have. Then you're gonna go into a horrible Google rabbit hole. You're gonna scare yourself a lot, confuse yourself a lot. So be careful where you get your information. Only go to medical sources, trustworthy sources, and take everything you find with a grain of salt. I also would have to say that maybe don't read too much about prognoses and how things progress over time, because first of all, no one really knows what's going to happen to you in the future or how your condition is going to progress if it is one of those tricky ones. And by reading a bunch of prognoses for different conditions, you're just going to probably scare yourself more than necessary. No need for that. However, doing a little bit of research, even if it gets a little bit confusing, it's going to allow you to ask your doctor intelligent questions when you see them. Write all these questions down, have them ready, because doctors are busy people. And when you go to visit your doctor, there's going to be a lot of other people in the waiting room getting anxious and impatient, waiting for their turn. And the doctor themselves is going to be a little bit anxious and impatient also, trying to get through everybody. So they're not going to sit there for 5 minutes or however long it is while you just go, and think of new questions. So try to have these questions as ready as possible. Of course, new questions will come up during the visit, but hopefully these will be obvious and instant. Be prepared with questions. If you have too many questions, prioritize your questions. Ask the really important ones on that visit. And if you don't get to all of them, at least the ones you didn't get to were not super important, and you can get to them next time.
Very stable beagle.
Organize your medical history and have it ready in a neat little folder. That was my folder. This is something I do every time, especially every time I go to a new doctor. I get all my papers, and ever since I was 2.5 years old, I have images from back then. Get all your images and reports ready, and if you want to be extra zealous, organize them in the folder in chronological order. Just in case you might not remember all the details of what happened, if you hand this folder over to your new doctor or new specialist that you're consulting, they'll be able to see everything in order, the whole history from beginning to end. This is going to save time, both for you and for the doctor, and it's going to help this new doctor to give you their best opinion. Remember that these mysterious, chronic, rare conditions are kind of like puzzles to the doctors as well as to us. You need as much information as possible, and you need it to be presented in a way that is not confusing and that'll help things get along. Which brings me to the next tip, which is find a doctor who will actually answer your questions. For some reason, some doctors are not very communicative. Sometimes it's just because they're busy, or they just maybe don't think you're going to understand the technical things that they're going to talk about, or frankly, sometimes they're just jerks, or they don't think it's their job to explain things to you, which baffles me, to be honest, but you might run into people like that. I've been quite lucky that every single doctor I have met has not been like that. They were always quite willing to talk to me and explain things. I think that is partly because my background in biology makes them not mind, or maybe even enjoy a little bit nerding out with me on the anatomy of the eye and medical stuff, and I can understand a bit better than the average patient, let's say, some of these technical issues. So I've been lucky in that regard, but I do know, and you might know this also from experience with chronic illnesses, that sometimes doctors can condescend to their patient. If you don't feel satisfied by the end of your visit, definitely try to find a doctor who will answer your questions and will be communicative and actually give you the attention that you need. If for some reason you cannot access a new doctor, there are lots of support groups online for these eye conditions, retinal conditions in general, and you might find some useful information there to help you until you are able to access a doctor. If for whatever reason you cannot access a new doctor, there are lots of great international support groups online that can provide you with a little bit of support and maybe a little bit of information, at least until you can access another doctor. It really makes a huge difference when you find the doctor that will talk to you like a human being and actually simplify and explain everything the way they should. One more practical tip for your next eye doctor visit is, if you are a coffee drinker or a caffeine addict of any kind, try to skip the coffee that day or postpone it until after your visit, because some of the tests you might have to do require fixing your eye in a very stable point. And that is already very difficult for those of us who have certain eye conditions. But if you're also jittery because of all the caffeine you've consumed, it's going to be even more difficult. I myself have had to go back and redo tests, especially the visual field test, if you are familiar with it, simply because the doctors told me that by the time they got through testing my right eye, I got so tired that by the time they got to my left eye, I couldn't keep it still. So the results become unreliable, which is bad. So I had to come back and redo it. So save yourself the trouble and try to be as serene as a sailboat on a windless night. For the second part of the video, I want to talk about tips related to mental health. I think it pretty much goes without saying that sometimes these visits to the doctor can leave you feeling not so good, maybe a little bit hopeless or depressed or just emotionally exhausted. Let's talk about it. Let me tell you a few stories about some things that happened on some of my trips to the doctors. None of these things were huge because, like I said, I've been pretty lucky with my doctors for the most part. Nonetheless, there are sometimes things that doctors or other medical staff or technicians can upset you in different ways. For example, and this is the least problematic thing that happened. Very simply, the first time I went to Germany, I met a specialist who kept asking me questions about my symptoms and what I can and can't do and what I can and cannot see. And he was so baffled by my answers that he didn't know how to diagnose this or even where to place my condition. So he started grabbing textbooks off the shelf, opening them, asking me questions, slamming the books shut because, well, if you're giving me that answer, then this is not the book. Grabbing another one. It was pretty funny. The only sort of negative thing about that was that feeling of what is this? Do I have a mysterious thing that no one has ever seen before? Does that mean there's no answer? There's no whatever? And that's just anxiety. It's the worrying mind coming up with lots of different scenarios. Anyway, nothing against this doctor. So as you can see, sometimes things will happen that aren't in and of themselves bad in any way, but might still upset you or trigger some anxiety or something. On the other hand, sometimes people do things that I would classify as maybe insensitive. A doctor in Saudi Arabia, for example, and I've been to multiple doctors in Saudi Arabia, one of them was a very, very funny guy, cracking dad jokes from the moment I stepped in and said hi. I'd never met him before. It was pretty funny, and I thought, oh, great, this is gonna be a light visit. I only went there for glasses, by the way, so it wasn't anything about my retina at all. I just needed new glasses. But when he saw some of my papers, started trying to do the actual test, he was shocked by how little I could see on the chart, the Snellen chart. His face just fell. I had to explain to him that I have a retinal condition and I'm just here for glasses, it's okay, don't have to worry about it. But his face fell, he stopped cracking jokes, started saying things, oh, this is pretty bad actually. Okay. I left there not feeling great. It was upsetting. And yeah, I would classify this as just something insensitive that will happen sometimes. It's very important to understand if you are not visually impaired yourself or don't have a disability and but you have a friend who does, or you're just dealing with people who have disabilities, that pity is not good. No one wants it. Just don't express it. If you might feel it, but maybe just keep it to yourself. It's not helpful. Another situation, this time in Egypt, another doctor was again so intrigued, not baffled this time, but a little bit intrigued. There were some curiosities about my collection of symptoms or whatever they're looking at. I don't really know what they look at. That he started paging and calling his other colleagues in the building to come and look at my eyes, So very soon I was sitting in the examination room with 3 or 4 doctors poring over the one doctor's computer screen and talking to each other and having a debate right there in front of me. Yeah, I understand that it's just an interesting case for them, especially the young doctors who may have never seen anything like that before. I don't know, it felt a little weird, to be honest. A mix of feelings, a little bit, oh, they're giving me so much attention, isn't that nice? But on the other hand, what is this? It's not a freak show. Can we maybe do this another way? But anyways, feeling like I'm a curiosity or something on display at a weird museum of eyes is not particularly a nice feeling. I'll tell you in a minute how I deal with all of that. I'm just telling you stories right now. Another specialist that I saw in Germany, I went to Germany twice. The second time I went, I needed to see a visual aid specialist. And this person, their job is to sit with a visually impaired person and pair them with visual aid technology that will suit them, their needs. So CCTVs, magnifiers, electronic telescopes, optical, whatever. Lots of different visual aids out there exist. And this is probably the worst thing that happened on any of my visits. And I know people with disabilities and chronic illnesses have seen much worse, and much worse things can happen. But so this, I was complaining to this specialist that I was doing a lot of bicycling at the time. I was just wondering if there were any visual aid technologies that could help with that. Something that would increase contrast maybe, or reduce glare, something like special sunglasses. I was just complaining that sometimes I'm okay cycling in daylight, but sometimes I would have a couple of close calls here or there, or it was starting to feel a little more risky to bicycle. And she just looked at me and was like, "You are handicapped." So yeah, maybe you don't know this, but the word handicapped is not really a very nice word to use for someone who has a disability. There are better words to use, but yeah, she had this attitude of trying to make me face the truth as if I don't know my truth, and trying to make me see that I'm limited and that I have to accept that. And at the time, my response was to give a little smile, kind of more a smirk, actually, because I was, she doesn't know. But I don't really know why I gave that smirk. It was kind of, I don't know, quietly rebellious response, maybe. But anyway, I didn't argue with her or anything. I just moved on to the next thing. Other than that, I really don't think I've been treated badly by any of the doctors I've met. Again, sometimes things would upset me that don't have anything to do with the people I was there with or the doctors that I met. Sometimes it would just be, oh, I'm so tired of going to multiple doctors. I'm so tired of the tests. I'm so tired of not knowing what's gonna happen, or not knowing what I have or how bad it's going. All of that stuff can be quite a burden, especially if you tend to be the kind of person who is prone to anxiety or who overthinks or broods, has a tendency to brood on stuff. So, let me tell you a few tips that will help you make these trips less heavy, less painful, less triggering, whatever you want to call it. The first and probably the most obvious tip is try not to go alone. There are many reasons not to go to the eye doctor alone anyway, because probably they're going to put some little eye drops in your eyes to dilate your pupils, look inside, and that makes your vision blurry. So if you still actually rely on your vision to move around, leaving the doctor's office with more blurry or more impaired vision is not going to be easy. So take someone with you. But not just anybody, hopefully someone who is a friend or a family member who is not gonna be neurotic themselves about the visit or is gonna just be even more anxious than you. You need someone who's chill and who just wants to keep you company and talk about silly things and have a good time chatting in the waiting room between tests and all that stuff. It really helps keep your mind off of worries that will take you nowhere, because worrying about the future is pointless. Will just distract you from sitting there and worrying and spiraling into a hole. I've been to some of these doctors in different countries by myself a few times. I generally don't mind it, but I had to go alone a few times because, I traveled to this country by myself. It's not always easy to find someone who is willing and able, financially, time-wise, etc., to travel to a different country with you. So yeah, I had to do that a couple times, go by myself, and I was totally fine with it. But there were other times when it felt it would have been better or less difficult or whatever if a friend came with me. And whenever I could take a friend, I did. So that would be my first tip. Take someone chill with you. Another thing I use, at least for myself, is humor. After the visits that were a little bit upsetting, I was pretty quickly able to just see them as funny. The funny doctor in Saudi Arabia, the one who was cracking dad jokes all the time. True, I left that clinic feeling a little lousy, but a couple days later, just looking at the whole thing from start to finish, it was so darkly funny, more funny than dark even. But some of these things, the doctor in Germany was slamming textbooks and grabbing things off the shelf. It was very theatrical, and some of these things I would love to recreate as sketches with actors and stuff. Is pretty hilarious, some of it. So finding humor, being able to laugh at difficult situations is a pretty good thing. It can be healthy if you don't overuse it as a defense mechanism to avoid having negative feelings. In that case, it might not be so good. But yeah, generally speaking, quite helpful. The third and maybe most difficult thing I learned to do in these situations is to actually develop empathy. Boring, I know, it's boring. But it's very valuable. Going back to the visual aid specialist who told me I was handicapped and whatnot, first of all, the way I reframed this situation for myself was, well, first of all, she doesn't know me. And I know that only I can tell what I can and cannot do. I had already learned by the time I met this person that really I'm the only one who knows what I can and cannot do with regards to vision. So yeah, I had already stopped quite a while ago listening to anybody trying to tell me what I can and can't do because of my vision. But I can only imagine that if it was someone much younger than me or a kid or a teenager, that it could have been more damaging. So for those of you out there who might have visually impaired children, I would say definitely pay attention to how doctors talk to your kids. When I assume you would be accompanying them on these visits, like sometimes doctors are not that emotionally intelligent, so just be careful. And I don't mean that you should start arguments with the doctors or whatever, although sometimes you may be absolutely right to do that. But I'm saying that then you would be able to have a conversation with your kid about the things that the doctor said and how do you feel about what the doctor said and all that stuff. That would be very healthy. It might give you a chance to reverse any damage that might have been done intentionally or unintentionally, really. So I just had to remind myself that A, this person doesn't know me, doesn't know what I can and cannot do. Two, it she probably thinks, or she probably thought that it's her job to say these things for the patient's safety or to help them face the truth or whatever. If she perceived that I wasn't facing the truth, then maybe that was her attempt and making me see the truth, however misguided. And the third thing is that there probably was a bit of a language barrier. Her English wasn't great. She might have not even known at all that handicap is not a good word to use, or that being so blunt with telling someone that they're limited stuff is just a symptom of poor language or something that came out of her English not being so good. In that case, empathy helps me not get so worked up or get too upset by things that people say, especially when they're strangers. Another area where empathy helped was also understanding that for a doctor, a rare condition is an exciting thing sometimes. And so if doctors get excited and start calling their colleagues and whatever, that it's A, a little bit funny, and B, it's just they're human beings and maybe they're bored at work all the time and something exciting suddenly happens. So it's a human reaction, even if it's a little insensitive or whatever. If you can just step back and have some empathy, it just feels less bad. So take someone with you, try to have a sense of humor, practice empathy. And finally, I would say maybe plan something fun after the visit so that you, again, don't end up brooding after. Something fun, like a hangout with friends, going to the movies, whatever it is you like to do for fun, just do it. I think that's it for now on the mental health tips. Of course, you can go back and check out a video I made previously on mental health and disability. Okay, so we're nearly at the end of this video. I just have one last thing to tell you about. As I may have alluded to in the beginning of the video, my diagnosis changed again very recently. And I've been telling everybody on this channel and all over my life that I have retinitis pigmentosa, or RP, or some weird form of RP. But about 6 months ago, I went to yet another specialist, this time back home in Egypt, a younger person, someone very up to date on the latest and greatest, and a center in Cairo that has some of the most state-of-the-art equipment for photographing the retina. And of course, I don't remember the names of these machines or anything, but certainly much more advanced equipment than what I've been tested on before, whether in Germany or Saudi Arabia. And these new, very beautiful resolution, excellent images were able to give this specialist a lot more information about my condition. And I learned two things on this trip. One, I don't have retinitis pigmentosa. I have something called cone-rod dystrophy. And it is linked to a gene called ADAM9, which I already knew about the gene before going to this doctor. But she taught me that the best way to name my condition would be to call it an ADAM9 linked cone-rod dystrophy. And she taught me this whole new way of naming these conditions, which is what doctors are starting to do now. Because retinitis pigmentosa is a big family of conditions, and there's so much variation within retinitis pigmentosa itself that it's not a very informative way to name the condition in the first place. But apparently, and I hope I understood this correctly, when it comes to cone-rod dystrophy, these conditions that involve dystrophy of the retinal cells, or the atrophy of the retinal cells over time, are now being named more descriptively. So when we say cone-rod dystrophy, it means that the cone cells, the ones that see color and the best detail, etc., start to be affected first, and then the rods, which are the cells in the retina responsible for night vision, dark or low light vision. So the dash means that the cones go first and then the rods, but there are also conditions named with a slash. So cone/rod dystrophy means something else. It means if it is cone/rod, that the cones get affected a lot more. Cone-rod means cones go first and then rods. Cone/rod means that the cones get affected a lot more than the rods. So if the gene causing the condition is known, it is being used now in the naming of the condition. So my condition is linked to ADAM9, so it's ADAM9 linked cone-rod dystrophy. Someone else might have like their RPE65 gene is the one with the mutation or whatever. Then in that case, their condition would be named as RPE65 linked, and then a description of what's happening to the cells. So it seems to me a much more logical way to name things. So, and I think that's a pretty good piece of information to know going forward if you have a retinal condition. I mean, if your doctor is not already using that naming system, maybe just ask them about it, because I remember very clearly during the confusion phase of my journey, reading things online, reading about all these different retinal conditions, Leber's congenital amaurosis, Stargardt's disease, retinitis pigmentosa, macular degeneration, all these things, when you read about them, just as a layperson who's not a medical professional or an expert, they really seem similar. And then, am I doing the right thing? Should I be taking vitamin A? Should I not be taking vitamin A? All these things get very confusing very quickly. So yeah, maybe check that out if you're still confused about your diagnosis, or your diagnosis is actually still up in the air and no one really exactly knows, or they're still trying to figure out, then that's a good piece of information to know. That's it for this video, guys. Thank you for watching. Chicken says bye, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Please share this video if you like it, and there are links in the description for my Patreon and all that stuff. You can help me make a lot more of these videos by joining the Patreon, but it's also okay if you don't join the Patreon. It's supportive enough for you to watch. And see you next time. Shabola.